Today, I'm sharing something very personal with you here on the Magic Mindfulness podcast. Today's episode is about navigating grief during the holidays. And unfortunately, this is something that I have experienced firsthand and something that I know many of you might be facing as well. And so, before we begin, I just want to pause and acknowledge that this could be a very deeply emotional episode. So if you are listening while driving or at work or in a public space, you might want to save this for later when you are in a safe, private place where you can process your feelings, whether that means crying, journaling, or simply sitting quietly with what comes up. So welcome back to the Magic Mindfulness podcast. I am your host, Rachel Hupp, and mindfulness comes in so many forms, right? It helps us navigate the ups and the downs in all seasons of our life. And so today's episode is for those of you who are walking through grief right now, and also for those who are supporting loved ones who are grieving. Feel free to have a tissue nearby. You may want one. And I feel pretty sure I'm not going to make it through this episode without crying. We're going to be talking about the raw reality of holiday grief, how to honor your needs during this time, and finding ways to carry grief when it feels impossible. I'll be sharing my own personal experience and insights that I have gained along the way, both from my own journey and from the resources that I leaned on that helped me to survive what felt unsurvivable, right? And so please know that while I am speaking from my heart, this episode is by no means meant to replace professional support, right? So if you are struggling, please get the support that you need. You can reach out to a qualified counselor, a therapist, or even a grief specialist. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, I just want to let you know why it's okay that this feels as devastating as it does. We're going to be talking about dealing with those well-meaning but painful responses from others. We'll discuss the physical and the emotional reality of grief during the holidays. I'll talk about finding your own way through these challenging times, even when you don't want to, right? And resources and support that might help carry you through. And again, this is from my own personal experience. So take what serves you. And so as we move through this episode, just remember that you can pause anytime that you need to. There may be moments that feel especially heavy or triggering, and it is completely okay to take breaks. It's okay to cry, journal, do whatever you need to do to process what comes up for you. So, first of all, one thing that I learned, and something I'll refer to often, Megan Devine, she has a journal, How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. And she has a book. I'll think of the name here in a few minutes, but essentially, her writing acknowledged and validated to me that this really is as bad as I think it is. And that was the first time that I felt seen and supported. And so I want you to know that it really is as bad as you think it is. And no, you're not doing it wrong. Okay. Because so many times, we'll get into this more later. In our society, though, we're just not equipped to deal with grief. And so we feel like we either need to rush through it and get to the other side where we can feel happy again, or we feel stuck in it. We wallow in it and it holds us down. We can't get out. We can't pull ourselves through. And so grief is one of the experiences on the full human spectrum of emotions, even though we don't want to deal with it, right? But it's not a problem to be fixed. It's an experience to be carried. And so my personal story, 2021, my mom passed away on Christmas Eve after an extended battle with COVID. My sister thankfully got in town that day, and we were visiting mom in the hospital. And as a kid, we had this tradition of we all got to open one gift on Christmas Eve, right? Mom loved Christmas. And so we all got to open one gift on Christmas Eve. And so my sister got in town on Christmas Eve, and we were visiting with my mom in the hospital. And she gave us her credit card and she sent us out to the store to buy Christmas Eve gifts for her grandkids. And so we went out, we went shopping, we got, what the kids would really like. And we stopped back by the hospital and we told her, you know, hey, this is what we got for each of your grandkids. And she was so excited. And she kept reiterating, make sure they open it today. Make sure they open it tonight, Christmas Eve, because that was our tradition, right? And so shortly after the kids opened their Christmas gifts, we got the call that mom had passed. And so, we had planned to go see her on Christmas Day in the hospital. Anyway, just a very, very emotional experience. And so here's what I have found. The person that I was when she was alive died the day she died. That version of me died that day. I can never go back to being that person again. I shattered. This was the soul shattering, crushing kind of grief where you feel like you just can't go on. Like, how are you possibly going to go on without this person in your life? And so thankfully, I was working with a coach, Christina Kunkel. I think she was in episode 3 or 4. It was episode 3 of the Magic Mindfulness podcast. I was working with a resilience coach at the time, and she really helped me to navigate this deep grief. So I want to, first of all, reiterate the power of having the support that you need during this awful, awful time, but also recognizing that as you learn your way, again, as you move through this soul crushing grief, your pieces will never go back together in the same place that they were. You're going to put yourself back together, but the version of you will be different than that version that you were. At least that's been my own experience. And so the reason that I'm sharing this with you is because I just want you to know that you're not alone. And, one of the hardest parts of this journey is dealing with well-meaning people, and they mean well. I'm not saying anything bad about this, but they try to help by finding the silver linings. And I've been on both sides of this, to be honest with you, because I didn't know any better. I've been the person trying to help, saying things that I meant to bring comfort, I hoped would bring comfort, only in my own experience with grief to understand how deeply those words hurt and how shallow they truly feel, right? And so, the ones, at least they're not suffering anymore. At least you had them for as long as you did. They're in a better place now. Or maybe the most painful one, everything happens for a reason. Does it really? And here's the thing, I've done this before. I've been on both sides. Like I said, we have the kindest intentions. We mean well. We don't mean to be hurtful. But here's the thing. In our Western culture, we have been conditioned to try to fix the pain, to look for the bright side, to move quickly past discomfort. We don't want to sit in discomfort, right? We're not taught how to sit with grief. We're not taught to feel and experience the full spectrum of human emotions, or how to support others in their darkest moments, or how to navigate those darkest moments ourselves, right? So, coming back to my own experience on losing my mom on Christmas Eve, when we're in that overwhelming, soul crushing level of grief, we don't need solutions. We don't need silver linings. We need acknowledgement of just how devastating this loss is. We need people who can be present with our pain, who can hold space for us without trying to fix it, without trying to make it better, because some things can't be fixed. So when someone tells you they're in a better place, it's totally fine to think, maybe so, but I want them here with me. When they say, at least they're not suffering, it's okay to think, but I miss their laugh, their voice, their presence in my life. All of these things are okay. And so I just want to pause here for a moment, because if you are feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to take a break, right? This conversation will be here when you are ready to come back. Take a deep breath. One breath at a time, we get through it, right? One breath at a time. There's something else about grief that often surprises people. At least I was surprised by it. And that is just how physically exhausting grief can be. So there's the mental, the emotional, that raw, rushing, feeling like, how am I going to get through this? But then it's physically exhausting. Well, it's not just emotionally crushing. It can leave you completely physically drained. You know, that first Christmas day, I really just wanted to stay in bed all day, right? Just getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain. So, we have obligations. My sister was in town, my family, my niece, and my nephews were in town. And, coming together as family during that time was very supportive, right? But I want to encourage you to the extent possible, create additional space for rest. This might mean saying no to holiday events that feel too overwhelming, right? It might mean setting those healthy boundaries. Maybe taking a nap instead of sitting down to write out Christmas cards. Maybe it's ordering takeout instead of cooking. Maybe it is relying on your friends and family when they ask you how they can support you, calling them. I don't have the energy to cook for myself. Can you provide meals for me? So, whatever you need to do to give yourself that space, I really, really encourage you to do it. Right now, you're focusing on just getting through the day, right? That's all. That's probably all you can do, right? Survival itself is enough right now. So how do we move through these days when it feels impossible? Well, when it comes to finding ways to move through these days, remember, this is deeply personal. It's going to be different for each and every one of us. So I'm sharing again from my own experience in the hope that somehow it helps you through this worst time, right? It's awful. Um, so for me, some days my yoga mat really felt like my sanctuary, right? Whether I was actually physically moving, some days I felt like I need to move that grief through my body. It felt like physically it was stuck in my body and I just needed to do something to help move that energy out. Some days I just chose a position to lay down and cry, maybe child's pose or simply lying there breathing, right? But my yoga mat was a space where I could just be with my grief and allow myself to sit with those feelings, to let them be exactly as they were without trying to change them or move them out or force them away, right? And that's uncomfortable. We don't want to deal with it. Nobody wants to deal with it. It's awful. But I knew for me that to be able to learn to carry it, I had to allow myself to process it. And so that was what worked for me. And like I said, it wasn't the same thing every day. It wasn't the same thing every moment. It was really just tuning in, checking in with myself. What do I need today? What do I need in this moment? And just like I needed that sanctuary, you probably need one right now if you are in this space. So feel free to pause, take a breath, cry, or just sit with whatever is coming up for you. Other days, like I said, sometimes it was a moving yoga practice, but when I needed to move, sometimes running was my moving meditation, right? Sometimes just the act of, I was surprised. I really turned to coloring books during this time because I couldn't function. I couldn't focus. I couldn't do anything, but I needed to not just sit there sometimes. And so, coloring I found very calming for my mind because it gave me something to focus on that didn't take a lot of effort. It was a really quiet focus that gave my mind a tiny break from not really a break, more of like a diversion, I guess. I could hold the grief, I could be with the grief, but I didn't actually need to be or do anything for anyone. It just gave me something to do. And so, that first Christmas day, um, we always Well, we used to always, and this is where it gets really hard, right? The first anything without your person is devastating. It's like you go through that loss again every single time. And so, I did get to spend some time with my sister and her family, my family, our family. And we normally go to my partner's family's house as well on Christmas Day when we're in town. And so, of course, everybody said I didn't have to come. There's nothing wrong with staying home. But I chose to go. I chose to go and spend our time with my partner's family. I needed something that felt normal. And, the whole time, sorry, taking a moment. The whole time I was there, like I kept crying, right? Um, but there's just something about having that support network around you, having people who love you and care about you to help you hold yourself together when you can't do it yourself. I knew I was going to cry a lot during this episode, so I apologize if that's triggering for you. But I think it's important that we talk about this because so often in our society, we like to sugarcoat things or, you know, gosh, your person passed 3 months ago. Why are you still so sad? Um, there's just this lack of understanding and empathy around it. And so one of my goals in going through that experience myself and not feeling seen and supported in the way that I needed to be is making sure that I share what helped me so that you hopefully have the tools and resources to make this most awful time a little more bearable, right? And so I did go over and spend Christmas Day with my partner's family, like we normally would. But I want you to know that some days you might need that connection. Sometimes you might want that support, but other days you might need solitude. There's no right, there's no wrong. Both of those are completely valid. So listen to what you need. Check in with yourself in each moment. It might change hour by hour, and that is totally okay. And so, you know, having some practical tools ready can help. And I know that this sounds, um, I don't know, you don't want to prepare for grief, but when you find yourself in that moment, I wish that I'd had these resources in the very, very, very beginning, especially for those moments when grief feels too big for words. So, one thing that I got the Journal for Grief by Megan Devine. It's how to carry what can't be fixed. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't had I don't think strength is the right word. I haven't, I don't know what the right word is, but I haven't made my way all the way through it yet. Some days I go through and I look for what I might need. Sometimes I go through page by page, go back to the beginning and pick up where I left off. She says some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. But anyway, one thing that I thought was really powerful in this workbook and something that I had wished that I had had at the time, because when grief feels too big for words, when you don't know how to express what you need, she suggests having pre-written cards or notes handy. And so these might say things like, thanks for asking how I am. I might cry. That's okay. And you can give somebody this card because, sometimes when somebody asks, you just start crying. Or you give them a card that says, I can't talk about it right now, but I appreciate you care. And that, I don't know. I didn't do that. And I wish I had had those at the time because sometimes somebody would ask me, meaning well, you know, how I was doing. And if I was at work, I would have to like rush, to the bathroom or something to take some time to process. So when grief leaves you speechless, these cards can speak for you. And so before we talk about holiday traditions, I want to invite you to take a deep breath with me. Take a deep breath in and let it go. And just remember again, you can take this at your own pace. If you need to pause, you need to take a break. If it's feeling like too much, you can stop listening if you need to. But, when it comes to holiday traditions, there is another layer of grief to navigate. And these celebrations that once brought joy, the reality is that they might feel impossibly heavy now, and that is normal too, right? That empty chair at the dinner table might feel like it is screaming with silence. The tradition that your loved one treasured, they might feel both precious, but also extremely painful. And so, like we talked about earlier, that tradition of opening one gift on Christmas Eve, That was really special, but we didn't know that was the last time we were going to get to do it. So you have options here. You can skip traditions entirely this year. And I say this from my own experience because your experience might be different, right? I don't have children. If you have traditions that you feel that you need to maintain for your children, that might add an additional layer of complexity to this, right? So again, I'm speaking from my own experience. So I invite you to take what serves you and adapt it to whatever you are going through in this moment, because it's different for all of us, but there are similarities as well. It's heavy, hard. We don't get through it. We don't get over it. We learn to carry it. And the talking about these holiday traditions, if you feel like you need to skip them and you can do that, maybe modify them to let them feel more manageable, or maybe create completely new ones. Take it day by day, take it moment by moment, and decide what feels possible as you go. Remember to breathe. Something that I learned through yoga and meditation, and then later, unfortunately, through grief, is this practice of sitting with discomfort, not trying to fix it, not trying to push it away, but acknowledging its presence. Sometimes that meant showing up on my mat just to cry. Sometimes it meant sitting in meditation while my mind retraced every moment, every decision, every word. And this is part of grief too, right? That replaying, the questioning, the wanting to understand something that often defies understanding. So I know looking ahead might feel impossible right now, and that is okay. If you can only focus on getting through the next breath, the next moment, the next hour, that is enough for right now. There's no timeline for grief. There's no roadmap for rebuilding a life that looks so different from what you expected. What I can tell you from my own experience is that while the grief doesn't get smaller, we slowly build more strength and resilience to carry it. We learn, create space for both, for the profound loss and for moments of peace, for the tears and for the memories that might eventually bring a smile through these tears. My mom died December 24th. And that February for Valentine's Day, my partner and I went on a cruise. And I remember I had such a hard time allowing myself to have fun. And I was still just so emotionally drained. I mean, I think I was in bed by like 9 o'clock every single night, and it's just exhausting. So whatever you're going through, I see you, my friend. I'm sorry that you're going through it. I wish you weren't. But we learn to create space for both. That's where I was going with this. For the profound loss, for the moments of peace, for the tears and the memories that might eventually bring a smile through those tears. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this conversation, it's this. Your grief is a reflection of your love. It's not something to rush through or get over. It's not something to hide or apologize for. Whether you're facing your first holiday season without your loved one, or your fifth, or your 15th, your feelings are valid. Your needs are valid. Your way of moving through this time in a way that honors and supports you is valid. So before we wrap up, I want to share some resources that have been lifelines for me and that might help you too. Now, Megan Devine's book, this is the name I couldn't think of earlier. It's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. I bought the digital version. I kind of wish I had bought the paperback or hard copy now, but I have the Kindle version. But it's okay that you're not okay. Her website, refugeingrief.com, and the workbook, How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. They offer some invaluable support and practical tools, including those communication cards that I mentioned. I also want to share two powerful resources from previous guests on this podcast. Now, I did not find these in the early stages of my grief, but they are resources that I have since learned are available. So Yvonne Stoltzfus' book, The Pleasure of Healing, I interviewed her in episode 20, and then Kimberly Byers' work, Grief Almost Had Me, Peace Brought Me Out, 7 Steps from Grief to Peace, which also includes a journal and workbook. And that was in episode 30, I believe. Remember that professional support is available to grief counselors, support groups who understand the unique challenges of holiday grief. And there are also yoga therapists who may be able to support you as you move throughout this phase, as you work to just simply get through the day. And if you're drawn to movement or mindfulness practices, again, you can look for grief informed yoga teachers or meditation guides. Sometimes just having a structured, safe space to be with your grief can be supportive. In my own experience, I was working with a resilience coach prior to that. Um, my mom getting sick and going in the hospital, but she was able to support me through this time and to give me tools like EFT tapping, some mindfulness practices, some breathing practices, some movement practices, some journaling practices that helped me to get through the worst time in my entire life. So, most importantly, know that while these resources are available, there's no pressure to use them, any of them, until or unless they feel right for you. Sometimes just knowing that they are out there can be comforting, even if you're not ready to engage with them yet. Remember, survival is enough right now. One breath, one moment, one day at a time. So before we wrap up today, I just want to remind you of something important. What you're feeling right now, it really is that devastating. It is as hard as it seems. And while I wish that I could tell you there's a way to make it hurt less, especially during the holidays, what I can tell you is this: you can learn to carry this grief even when it feels impossible. Your only job right now is to get through this, to survive these moments, to move through your day, one breath, one moment at a time. There's no right way, there's no wrong way to navigate grief, especially during the holiday season. Whatever you need to do to get through, whether that's maintaining traditions, creating new ones, skipping them, seeking connection, or finding solitude, it's all valid. If you need support, please know that you don't have to carry this alone. In the show notes, you'll find links to some of the resources we discussed today, from Megan Devine's works, her website, to episodes with previous guests. And also encourage you to seek out information about grief support groups in your area and counseling services. Even if you're not ready to reach out right now, sometimes just knowing these resources exist can provide a small measure of comfort. So I hope that something in this episode helped you feel less alone. Maybe you'll find something in here that will help you through this most difficult time. I am sorry that you're going through this right now, or that you're supporting someone perhaps that's going through this and you don't know how to help them. Just being there, just holding space. I think that's really all we can do for each other. All right. Until next time, please be gentle with yourself. You're carrying something heavy. You're doing the best you can. One breath, one moment, one day at a time.